Harrisville was located in the heart of Texas as a city of contrasts. Oil rigs stood side by side with modern business centers, and old ranches gave way to new residential complexes. The population of 150,000 created an atmosphere where everyone knew each other by sight, but not all secrets were out in the open. On Monday morning, a week before the wedding that would change many people's lives forever, Michael Sterling stood at the window of his office on the 20th floor of the city's only skyscraper. His gaze was fixed on the construction site below, where workers in yellow hard hats bustled around a new residential complex. This project was supposed to be his crowning achievement, but now everything had become complicated. "Mr. Sterling, the documents for the Golden Oaks project are ready for your signature," his secretary said, placing a folder on the massive oak desk. Michael didn't turn around. At 45, he had retained his athletic figure and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to power. The gray hair at his temples only added to his dignified appearance. "Thank you, Linda. What's the latest on the competition to renovate the old train station?" Linda hesitated. "They say Connolly is lobbying very hard for his bid. He has good connections at City Hall." Michael finally turned around. His gray eyes were as cold as the morning fog over the Texas plains. "Eric Connolly has always been good at networking. Too bad he knows less about construction." Linda nodded and left, feeling the tension that always arose when Sterling Construction's main competitor was mentioned. Michael had built his empire from scratch in 20 years, turning a small construction crew into the largest company in the region. His fortune was estimated at $50 million, and every project was not just business to him, but a matter of personal honor. But the arrival of Eric Connolly 3 years ago changed the balance of power. Connolly came to Harrisville from Houston with a lot of capital, modern technology, and most importantly, a charm that quickly won over the city's elite. That same morning, in another part of town, Evelina Harrison stood in front of the mirror at the White Roses bridal salon. The dress fit her slender figure perfectly, emphasizing her natural elegance. At 32, she radiated the confidence of a successful woman who knew her worth. "You look like a princess," exclaimed the salon owner, Mrs. Rose, adjusting the veil. "Eric will be thrilled." Evelina smiled, but deep down she felt a strange uneasiness. The last few days had been filled with wedding preparations, and she had barely managed to keep up with her design projects. Her studio, Harrison Interiors, had become one of the most sought after in the city over the past 2 years. "Sorry I'm late!" Jake Harrison, the bride's younger brother, burst into the salon. His work clothes and machine oil-stained hands contrasted with the salon's elegant surroundings. "Jake, you promised you'd change," Evelina scolded him, but her voice was warm. Her brother was the only close person she had left after their parents died 5 years ago. "I'm sorry, sis. A customer came in with a problem with his transmission, and I couldn't leave him." Jake worked at Texas Motors Auto Repair Shop and was known as the best mechanic in the area. Despite their differences in education and social status, the brother and sister remained very close. "How are the preparations going?" Jake asked, looking at the dress. "Everything's under control. Eric is handling the catering, and I'm doing the decorations and flowers. Just the finishing touches left." Jake frowned. "What about Michael? How is he reacting to the wedding?" Evelyn froze. The name Michael Sterling always evoked complicated feelings in her. 2 years ago, he wasn't just her employer. They had a relationship that seemed serious. Michael was generous, attentive, and knew how to surprise her with expensive gifts and romantic gestures. "Jake, that's in the past," she said quietly. "Michael is a good man, but we weren't right for each other." "A good man doesn't stalk his ex-girlfriend 2 years after they break up," Jake muttered. Evelina turned to her brother. "What are you talking about? Haven't you noticed? His car regularly shows up outside your studio. My friend Tommy works as a valet in the city center, and he's seen Sterling sitting in his Mercedes across from your office several times." Evelina's heart began to beat faster. She had indeed sometimes felt someone's gaze, but she had dismissed it as pre-wedding nerves. "Maybe he just has business in that area," she said uncertainly. Mrs. Rose delicately moved to the other end of the salon, giving her brother and sister a chance to talk alone. "Evelina, I'm serious. That man is not the type to let go of what he thinks is his. Remember how he reacted when you decided to leave his company?" Evelina remembered. Michael had spent 2 hours trying to persuade her to stay, offering her a promotion, a raise, even a share in the business. When she explained that she wanted to start her own business, he took it as a personal betrayal. "It's different, Jake. Marriage is final. After Saturday, Michael and I will have nothing to talk about." Jake didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "Just be careful. And if anything seems strange, call me right away." At that moment, the phone rang at Sterling Construction. Michael slowly picked up the receiver. "Michael, this is Tom Rodriguez from City Hall." The familiar voice sounded tense. "I have some bad news for you about the train station project." Michael clenched his fist. "Connolly?" "Yes. The commission liked his proposal better. Formally, everything is above board, but I see. Thanks for letting me know." Michael hung up and stared into space for a few minutes. This was the third major project in a year that had gone to Eric Connolly. Coincidence? Michael didn't believe in coincidences. He took his cell phone and dialed the number of private investigator Frank Morgan, a former police officer who sometimes did sensitive work for big businesses. "Frank, I need information on how Connolly gets city contracts. All connections, all meetings, all conversations. Discreetly." "Got it, Michael. The usual fee? Double it, and do it fast." After the call, Michael went to the safe and took out a folder with photos. The pictures were of Evelina, at work in her studio, shopping, in a cafe with her friends. The last photos were taken 3 days ago. Evelina and Eric were leaving a jewelry store, holding hands and smiling. Michael looked at the photos for a long time. Evelina was the only woman who had made him believe in the possibility of a real relationship. 2 years ago, he had even considered proposing to her, but she chose independence, and now she had chosen Eric Connolly. The phone rang again. This time it was Linda from reception. "Mr. Sterling, Eric Connolly is here. He says it's urgent." Michael smiled. "Send him in." Eric Connolly entered the office with the confidence of a man accustomed to success. At 38, he looked younger than his age. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his expensive suit fit perfectly. "Michael, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Eric extended his hand for a handshake. Michael shook his hand, noting his competitor's firm grip. "I'm listening, Eric. The thing is, I'm getting married on Saturday, and I wanted to invite you to the ceremony in person." Michael raised his eyebrows. "That's unexpected. I know we're business rivals, but Evelina insisted that I invite all the people who were important in her life. And you, as her former employer, and not only that," Michael added quietly. Eric tensed for a moment, but quickly regained his friendly expression. "That's in the past, Michael. We're all adults." "Indeed." Michael stood up and walked over to the window. "Where will the celebration be held?" "At the Doobie Country Club. It starts at 4. I hope you can make it." Michael turned around. Something fleeting flashed in his eyes. "I'll be there, Eric. I wouldn't miss it for the world." After Eric left, Michael returned to the folder with the photos. His fingers slowly flipped through the pictures, lingering on each image of Evelina. A plan began to form in his head, cold and precise, like an architectural blueprint. Tuesday began with an unexpected downpour, a rare occurrence for a Texas summer. Evelina sat in her studio watching the streams of water run down the windows, blurring the outlines of familiar streets. In weather like this, memories always became especially vivid. 2.5 years ago, she had first walked through the doors of Sterling Construction looking for work. She had just graduated from college with a degree in interior design and was desperate for a steady income. Jake had just lost his job on an oil rig in an accident, and the responsibility for the family fell on her shoulders. Michael Sterling made a strong impression on her from the first meeting. He was not just a successful businessman. He had the special energy of someone who knows exactly what he wants out of life. When he offered her the position of design project coordinator, Evelina knew it was her chance to change her destiny. The first few months on the job were intense. Michael demanded total commitment from his employees, but he rewarded them generously for their results. Evelina quickly established herself as a talented designer with a keen understanding of client needs. Her projects brought the company new contracts and enhanced Sterling Construction's reputation. Their personal relationship began a year later. It happened while they were working on the Texas Hills luxury residential complex project. They stayed late at the office discussing design details when Michael suddenly said, "Evelina, you've turned my company into something more than just a construction business. You've brought beauty to it." They spent that evening at an expensive restaurant talking about their plans, dreams, and the future. Michael was a charming conversationalist, educated, well-read, and with a good sense of humor. He talked about his childhood in a poor family and how he built his business from scratch, working 18 hours a day. The next 8 months were like a fairy tale. Michael gave her expensive jewelry, took her on romantic trips to New Orleans and San Antonio, and introduced her to influential people in the city. Evelina felt like a princess next to this strong, successful man. But gradually, the fairy tale began to turn into a nightmare. The first warning signs appeared when Michael started asking her about every meeting she had with her friends. "I'm just interested in your life," he explained. Then he started accidentally showing up at places where she spent time without him. What a coincidence. I decided to stop by this bookstore too. When Evelina received an offer to work with another design studio, Michael made a scene. "You want to work with the competition? After everything I've done for you?" His voice was cold, and his eyes flashed with anger that frightened her. The final straw was the incident with Jake. Michael found out that Evelina's brother owed money for treatment for an injury he had sustained at work, and without her knowledge, paid off the debt. When Evelina was outraged by this interference in family affairs, Michael calmly said, "Now your brother is safe. Isn't that what matters?" "You bought me," Evelina said bitterly. "I protected you," Michael replied. "The world is cruel, Evelina. Without my protection, you're lost." At that moment, she realized that Michael's love was a form of possession. He didn't see her as an equal partner, but as a beautiful thing to be protected and controlled. The breakup was painful. Michael couldn't understand why a woman would leave a man who could give her everything. He offered her marriage, children, a business together. "What more do you want?" he shouted. "Freedom," Evelina replied and handed in her resignation. The sound of rain on the glass brought her back to the present. Evelina shook her head, chasing away the painful memories. That was a different life. Now she had Eric, a man who respected her independence and supported her ambitions. They met 6 months after she broke up with Michael. Eric hired her studio to design his new office, and they immediately hit it off. He was the complete opposite of Michael, open, democratic, and willing to compromise. "I don't want to control your life," he said on one of their first dates. "I want to share it with you." These words became the foundation of their relationship. Eric never tried to restrict her freedom or make decisions for her. When she hesitated to accept his marriage proposal, he said, "Take your time. I'll wait as long as it takes." The phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Eric. "Hi, beautiful. How are the wedding preparations going?" "Everything's going according to plan. How's work?" Eric hesitated. "To be honest, it's a bit of a strange situation. I met with Sterling today." Evelina's heart skipped a beat. "Michael? Why?" "I wanted to invite him to our wedding. I thought it would be the right thing to do, to show that there's no personal animosity between us." "Eric, that wasn't the best idea." "Why? He agreed to come. He was perfectly civil." Evelina closed her eyes. She hadn't told Eric all the details of her relationship with Michael. She had simply said that they weren't compatible. Now she regretted it. "Eric, Michael isn't as simple as he seems." "What do you mean?" Before Evelina could answer, a client entered the studio. "I have to go. Let's talk at home." After the conversation, Evelina couldn't concentrate on her work. Michael's presence at the wedding seemed like a bad omen to her. At that time, at the Sterling construction office, Michael was studying a report from private investigator Frank Morgan. The information was extensive. Eric Connolly did indeed have connections at City Hall, but they were legitimate. He simply knew how to get along with officials and offered better terms on some projects. But one detail caught Michael's attention. It turned out that Eric met with the mayor, Robert Clark, not only on business matters. Their wives were friends, and the families often spent time together. This explained why Connolly received inside information about city tenders before other participants. Michael picked up the phone and dialed the number of the local newspaper, the Harrisville Daily. Jessica Parker speaking, answered the familiar voice of a journalist who specialized in city news. Jessica, I have some interesting information about corruption in City Hall. Michael Sterling? What a surprise. What's this about? It's about how some construction companies are getting advantages thanks to personal connections with the mayor. Jessica was interested. They agreed to meet the next day to exchange documents. Michael knew that a scandal in the press would seriously damage Eric's reputation just before his wedding. That evening, Detective Sarah Mitchell finished her shift at the city police department. At 42, she was one of Harrisville's most experienced investigators, with an impeccable reputation and a sharp analytical mind. Sarah had grown up in this town and knew it like the back of her hand. In her 18 years on the force, she had seen Harrisville change. It had grown larger and richer, but also more complicated. New money had brought new conflicts, and behind the facade of prosperity, human dramas played out. She remembered Michael Sterling well. His company had contacted the police several times about thefts at construction sites and vandalism. Sterling always gave the impression of a man accustomed to control and order. People like that found loss difficult to bear. Sarah also knew Evelyn Harrison. They had attended the same school, although in different years. The girl had an impeccable reputation, and her success in business was respected in the city. As for Eric Connolly, he had arrived in Harrisville relatively recently, but had quickly integrated into the local community. His company operated honestly, without violating labor laws or building codes. On Wednesday morning, Michael met with Jessica Parker in a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He gave her copies of documents confirming Eric's ties to City Hall and several photos of family gatherings. "These are serious allegations, Michael," said the journalist, looking through the materials. "But I don't see any direct evidence of a violation of the law. Conflict of interest is also a violation. City contracts should be awarded fairly, not based on personal friendships." Jessica nodded. "I'll check the information and publish the article tomorrow. That will give people a chance to form their own opinion." Michael was satisfied. The article would be published on Friday, the day before the wedding. It would ruin Eric's mood and show Evelina the true face of her fiancé. On Thursday evening, Evelina and Eric met with the wedding planner at the Doobie Country Club. The place was truly beautiful, an old colonial-style building surrounded by centuries-old oak trees and manicured gardens. "Everything will be perfect," assured Mrs. Anderson, the event coordinator. "The flowers will arrive in the morning, the musicians will start setting up at noon, and the photographer will be here at 2. Eric put his arm around Evelina's shoulders. "In 2 days, we'll be husband and wife." Evelina smiled, but she couldn't shake her uneasiness. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on it. "Eric, are you sure it was a good idea to invite Michael?" "Evelina, I understand that it wasn't easy for you to break up, but that's in the past. We're adults, and I don't want there to be any animosity between us. You don't understand. Michael doesn't forgive those who leave him." Eric turned to her. "What do you mean?" Evelina sighed. It was time to tell the truth. Our relationship ended, not just because we didn't get along. Michael is very possessive. He doesn't take rejection well. "Do you think he might cause problems?" "I don't know. Just be careful." At that moment, Michael was sitting in his office looking at the floor plan of the Oaks Country Club. He had been there 3 times before for various events and knew the layout well. The gardens surrounding the club offered many secluded spots. The service entrances were poorly guarded. Michael opened his desk drawer and took out a small box. Inside were 2 wedding rings, the ones he had bought for Evelina 2 years ago but never got around to giving her. On the inside of the woman's ring was engraved, "Forever yours, M." He stared at the rings for a long time, then carefully put them back. Tomorrow was Friday, the last day before the wedding. He had less than a day left to finish the preparations. Friday dawned with clear Texas skies, but the atmosphere in Harrisville was far from cloudless. Jessica Parker's article, "Family Ties or Corruption: How City Contracts Are Awarded," appeared on the front page of the Harrisville Daily at exactly 7 in the morning. Eric learned of the publication from his assistant, Mark, who called him at 6:30. "Boss, we have a problem. Have you seen the morning paper?" Eric, not yet fully awake, turned on his tablet and opened the local newspaper's website. The headline of the article woke him up completely. The journalist described in detail the family ties between the Connolly family and Mayor Clark, hinting at a possible conflict of interest in the distribution of city contracts. Damn it! Eric cursed as he read the article. Formally, there were no direct accusations, but the hints were clear enough. Where did they get this information? I don't know, boss, but the phone is ringing off the hook. The journalists want comments. Eric glanced at his watch. There were 31 hours left until the wedding, and he had a reputation crisis to deal with. Mark, prepare an official statement. We acted within the law, all tenders were won fairly, and my personal friendship with the mayor had no influence on business decisions, and find a good PR specialist. After the conversation, Eric dialed Evelina's number. Good morning, my love. I hope you haven't read the morning news yet. Evelina's voice sounded tense. I just read it. Eric, is this serious? No, of course not. All our contracts were obtained fairly, but someone clearly wants to ruin our wedding. Evelina paused. Michael. What? It's his style. He's always been a master of psychological pressure. Eric clenched his fists. If that's the case, he's gone too far. Meanwhile, at Sterling Construction, Michael read the article on his computer screen with satisfaction. The first part of his plan had worked perfectly. Eric would be distracted by reputation issues, and Evelina would begin to doubt her choice. Linda knocked on the door and entered with the morning mail. Mr. Sterling, there's a call for you from City Hall. Mr. Clark wants to meet to discuss the situation with the publication. Michael smiled. Tell him I'm busy preparing for the wedding. Linda raised her eyebrows in surprise, but nodded. After she left, Michael opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a small packet of white powder. Potassium cyanide was a fast-acting and relatively reliable poison that he had acquired through a chemist acquaintance under the pretext of controlling rodents on construction sites. A lethal dose could be placed in a standard vitamin capsule. Michael carefully poured the powder into a clear gelatin capsule and placed it in a small velvet jewelry box. From the outside, it looked like an expensive vitamin supplement or medicine. The plan was simple and elegant. At the wedding, he would approach Evelina for a private conversation, which would look natural to the guests. He would say that he wanted to say goodbye and wish her happiness. He would offer to drink to her future, one glass of champagne from a bottle he would bring with him as a gift. The capsule would dissolve in the champagne without a trace. Evelina will feel unwell after 15 to 20 minutes and ask him to accompany her to a secluded place. He will suggest the garden behind the club. There, away from the eyes of the guests, the poison will do its work. He will be the first to discover her body and call an ambulance. Cyanide decomposes quickly in the body, especially at high temperatures. By the time the body is taken to the morgue, traces of the poison will be extremely difficult to detect. The death will be recorded as a heart attack from stress or an allergic reaction. Michael checked his alibi. Yesterday, he made a special trip to his Dr. Harris for a routine checkup and complained of headaches and high blood pressure. The doctor prescribed a sedative and advised him to avoid stressful situations. But I have an important event tomorrow, Michael said at the time. The wedding of people who are dear to me. I can't not go. Then take one pill before the event, the doctor advised. And don't drink too much alcohol. The perfect cover. If anyone noticed his strange behavior at the wedding, he could always blame it on the medication and emotional stress. At noon, Evelina's friends gathered at Harrison Interiors for a traditional bachelorette party, but the atmosphere was far from festive. Evelina, you look terrible, said her best friend Rachel, a manager at a local bank. What's going on? Just pre-wedding nerves, Evelina tried to joke, but no one was fooled. Susan, the owner of a flower shop, shook her head. Darling, this looks more like panic. And that article in the newspaper, is Eric really? No, Evelina replied sharply. Eric is an honest man. Someone is trying to hurt him. Who? Rachel asked. Evelina hesitated. Maybe Michael Sterling. The friends exchanged glances. They knew about Evelina's past relationship with the influential businessman, but had no idea how serious the conflict was. Evelina, Susan said cautiously, if you think Sterling could cause problems, maybe you should postpone the wedding. No way, Evelina exclaimed. "I won't let him control my life. Tomorrow I'm marrying Eric no matter what." At that moment, Michael drove to his country house, located 20 minutes away from the Oaks Club. He needed to prepare himself mentally and physically for the next day. The house was his pride and joy, a 2-story Texas ranch-style mansion surrounded by 10 acres of land. Here he could think and plan without interruption. Michael went into his home office and took a gun out of the safe, a Colt .45 he had bought for self-defense, but had never used. The poison plan seemed more elegant, but he needed a backup plan just in case. He carefully cleaned the gun and loaded it. If something went wrong with his main plan, he would be ready to improvise. In the evening, Michael drove to the country club to reconnaissance. He parked his car a kilometer from the club and walked to the grounds. The security guard at the main entrance was dozing in his booth, and the service entrances were unguarded. Michael walked around the perimeter of the building, studying every corner. The garden behind the club was the perfect place. Lots of trees and bushes to hide them from prying eyes. The path to a small gazebo was far enough away from the main building. Returning to his car, he noticed a familiar figure at the service entrance. Jake Harrison was talking to someone on the phone, pacing nervously near his truck. "I'm telling you, something's wrong." Michael heard a snippet of the conversation. "Evelyn's on edge, and that's Sterling." Michael listened more closely, but Jake ended the call and drove away. Evelyn's brother was clearly suspicious. This could complicate things. Detective Sarah Mitchell finished her shift at 10 o'clock in the evening and drove home through the deserted streets of Harrisville. The morning article about possible corruption in City Hall was the main topic of discussion in town, and she expected official complaints to come in tomorrow. As she drove past the Sterling construction office, she noticed the lights on in the upper floor. Strange. The building was usually empty in the evenings. Sarah slowed down and looked more closely. A familiar figure flashed in Michael Sterling's office window. What was he doing in the office so late on the eve of his ex-employee's wedding? Sarah had been a detective long enough to trust her intuition, and her intuition told her that something was wrong. She parked across the street and watched for a few more minutes. Michael paced around his office, looking at something, then went to the window and stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness. There was something disturbing about his posture. Sarah decided to check out Sterling. At home, she turned on her computer and searched the database. No serious violations of the law, just minor administrative fines and a few complaints about construction noise. But there was one interesting fact. 2 years ago, Evelyn Harrison had filed a harassment complaint, but then withdrew it. That changed things. Sarah decided to talk to Evelyn tomorrow. On Saturday, the day of the wedding, Michael woke up at dawn. He felt a strange calmness, the kind that people feel when they have made a final decision. Breakfast consisted of black coffee and toast. He had no appetite. Michael took a shower, shaved carefully, and put on his best suit, a dark blue Hugo Boss that Evelina had always particularly liked. In his jacket pocket was a velvet box with a capsule. In another pocket was a small bottle of expensive French champagne, which he had supposedly brought as a gift for the newlyweds. Before leaving the house, Michael checked the gun once more and hid it in the glove compartment of his car. He hoped he wouldn't have to use it. At that moment, Evelina's house was bustling with activity. The hairdresser and makeup artist were working on the bride's look, while her friends fussied over the dress and jewelry. "You look beautiful," said Rachel, admiring the result. "Eric will be thrilled." Evelina looked at herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly. Her hair was flawless, but her eyes betrayed her inner tension. "Girls, can you leave me alone for a minute?" she asked. When her friends left, Evelina took her phone and dialed Detective Sarah Mitchell's number. "Detective Mitchell? This is Evelina Harrison. I'm sorry to bother you on your day off, but I need to talk to you." Sarah, who was just about to contact Evelina, was surprised. "Of course, Miss Harrison. What is it?" "It's about Michael Sterling. I think he might cause problems at my wedding." "What kind of trouble?" Evelina hesitated. 2 years ago, I filed a stalking report against him. I withdrew it because he promised to leave me alone. But I'm not sure he'll keep his word." Sarah picked up a pen. "Tell me more." "Tell?" Evelyn briefly described the history of their relationship and the reasons for their breakup. Sarah listened attentively, taking notes. Miss Harrison, do you have any specific reason to believe that Mr. Sterling might harm you today? Just a gut feeling. And yesterday's newspaper article, that's his style. Sarah thought about it. There were no formal grounds for arresting Sterling, but she could increase patrols in the area around the club. All right, Miss Harrison. I'll arrange for extra officers to be on duty in the area around the club, and if you see anything suspicious, call me immediately. After the conversation, Evelina felt somewhat relieved. At least the police had been notified. Michael arrived at the Oaks Club an hour before the ceremony was to begin. Guests were just starting to arrive, and he easily passed through the main entrance. No one checked invitations. Everyone knew the influential businessman by sight. He walked around the hall, noting the location of the tables, the bar, and the service rooms. Evelina and Eric had not yet arrived. According to tradition, the bride was supposed to appear at the last moment. Michael, what a pleasant surprise! Mayor Robert Clark approached him. His face was tense after the morning's article. Robert, how are you? I hope the morning's publications didn't upset you too much. The mayor pursed his lips. Do you know anything about this? Michael feigned innocence. Me? I just read the news like everyone else. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the music began to play and the guests took their seats. Eric stood at the altar in his tuxedo, nervously adjusting his tie. His face was tense after the morning's events. The doors to the hall opened and Evelina appeared. She was stunningly beautiful in her white dress, but Michael noticed the anxiety in her eyes. She quickly scanned the room and stopped when her eyes met his. For a moment, their eyes met. Evelina paled, but continued walking toward the altar. The priest recited the traditional words, but Michael wasn't listening. His attention was completely focused on Evelina. She stood at the altar, holding Eric's hand, but periodically glanced at the guests, clearly looking for him in the crowd. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the priest solemnly proclaimed. Eric kissed Evelina, and the hall erupted in applause. Michael clapped along with everyone else, but his face remained stony. The time for the first phase of the plan had come. While the newlyweds were receiving congratulations, Michael quietly made his way to the bar. He took a bottle of 1996 Dom Perignon champagne from his inside pocket, an expensive vintage that couldn't be bought in a regular store. Excuse me, could you chill this bottle? He asked the bartender. It's a special gift for the newlyweds. The bartender, accustomed to the whims of wealthy customers, placed the bottle in an ice bucket without question. For the next half hour, Michael waited patiently for the right moment. The guests took photos, chatted, and drank champagne from the club's supply. Evelina and Eric moved from group to group, thanking everyone for coming. Michael noticed that Detective Sarah Mitchell was among the guests. This was unexpected. Police officers don't usually attend private events, so Evelina had indeed gone to the authorities. But that didn't change his plans. On the contrary, the detective's presence could even help by creating the appearance that the murder had taken place right under the nose of law enforcement. At 5:30, as the sun began to set, Michael decided to act. He walked over to the bar and picked up his bottle. Evelina, he called out, approaching the group where the newlyweds were talking to Mayor Clark and his wife. Evelina turned around. Her face tensed instantly. Michael, I wasn't sure you'd come. How could I miss such an important event? Michael smiled his trademark charming smile. Eric, congratulations. You're a lucky man. Eric shook his hand, but his handshake was cold. Thanks for the congratulations, Michael. I have a small gift, Michael said, raising a bottle. Dom Perignon, 1996, the year Evelina graduated from high school, if I remember correctly. Evelina looked at him in surprise. He really remembered such details. That's very generous of you, she said cautiously. I thought we could drink to your happiness, like old friends. Michael emphasized the word friends, and Eric sensed a hidden threat in his tone. Of course, Evelina replied, even though every instinct told her to be wary. Michael opened the bottle with the professional dexterity of a sommelier. The cork popped with a soft pop, and the fragrant drink hissed in the neck of the bottle. Let me pour, he said, pulling small glasses from his pocket that he had accidentally grabbed from the bar. As he poured the champagne, Michael discreetly broke the gelatin capsule containing the poison over one of the glasses. The white powder dissolved instantly in the sparkling wine without a trace. "To the happy bride," he said, handing the poisoned glass to Evelina. "To a new chapter in your life," added Eric, raising his glass. Evelina took the glass but did not rush to drink. "Here's to you, newlyweds." He drank his champagne in one gulp. Eric followed his example. Evelina slowly raised the glass to her lips but stopped at the last moment. "You know, Michael, I think we need to talk in private. We have some unresolved issues." Michael's heart began to beat faster. This was even better than he had planned. "Of course, Evelina, I also think we have something to discuss." Eric frowned. "Evelina, maybe you shouldn't." "It's okay," his wife assured him. "It'll only take a few minutes." She didn't drink the champagne, placing the glass on the nearest table. Michael cursed silently. Plan A had failed, but he had a plan B ready. "Let's go out to the garden," he suggested. "It's quieter there." They went out through the French doors onto the terrace and then down the steps into the garden. The sun was already setting, painting the sky shades of orange and pink. Centuries-old oak trees cast long shadows on the manicured lawns. Evelina stopped near a small arbor covered with ivy. The main clubhouse was not visible from here. "Michael, I know you're behind the newspaper article," she said without preamble. Michael didn't deny it. "People have a right to know the truth about corruption." "What truth?" "Eric is an honest man. Eric is a crook who uses his connections to get lucrative contracts, just like he used you to get information about my business." Evelyn shook her head. "You haven't changed. You're still trying to control my life." "I'm trying to protect you!" Michael's voice rose. "Can't you see that this man married you just to gain access to the city's elite?" "That's not true, and you know it." Michael took a step closer. A familiar obsession flashed in his eyes. "Evelina, I offered you everything, wealth, status, love, and you chose this mediocrity." "I chose freedom." "Freedom?" Michael laughed bitterly. "You just traded one cage for another. Only now your cage is more pathetic." Evelina turned to leave, but Michael grabbed her arm. "Let me go," she said coldly. "Number, we're not done talking." At that moment, something snapped in Michael's mind. 2 years of pent-up anger and pain burst forth. If he couldn't have Evelina, no one would. His hands wrapped around her neck. "If I can't be with you, no one will," he whispered. Evelina tried to scream, but his strong fingers squeezed her throat. She scratched his hands, trying to break free, but Michael was stronger. "I'm sorry," he whispered, continuing to squeeze. "I'm sorry, but there's no other way." Evelina stopped resisting. Her body went limp in his arms. Michael carefully laid her down on the ground next to the gazebo. His heart was racing. His hands were shaking. He checked her pulse. It was gone. Now he had to act quickly. Michael took the engagement ring he had bought for her 2 years ago out of his pocket and slipped it onto her finger over Eric's wedding ring. "Now you're mine forever," he whispered. Then he carefully adjusted her dress and hair so that everything looked natural. He made it look like she had fainted and hit her head on a rock at the base of the gazebo. Michael took a deep breath to compose himself. He had to get back to the guests and establish an alibi. He headed back toward the clubhouse, but Jake Harrison stopped him at the terrace. "Michael, where's Evelyn?" "Jake!" Michael feigned surprise. "She stayed in the garden. She said she needed some fresh air. Wedding nerves, you know." Jake looked at him closely. "You look upset." "Of course. It's hard to see the woman you loved marry someone else." Jake nodded understandingly, but something in his eyes said he didn't quite believe him. "I'll go check on her," Jake said. Sure. I'll go back to the guests." Michael entered the hall and walked over to the bar. He ordered a double whiskey and drank it in one gulp. The alcohol would explain his nervousness. 5 minutes later, a scream came from the garden. Jake had found his sister's body. "Help! Ambulance! Evelina!" The guests rushed out into the garden. Eric was the first to reach the gazebo and fell to his knees next to his wife's motionless body. Evelyn, wake up!" Michael approached the group of people surrounding the body. "What happened?" "She's unconscious," Jake replied, gasping for breath. "Call an ambulance." Detective Sarah Mitchell was already there, checking her pulse. Her face was grim. "It's too late," she said quietly. "She's dead." Eric let out an animal cry of pain. Jake covered his face with his hands. Michael feigned shock. This can't be. She was just here, talking to me. Sarah looked at him intently. What were you talking about? About the past. She wanted to close that chapter for good. Michael paused, as if searching for the right words. She said she was happy with Eric and asked me not to interfere in their lives. And how did you respond to that? I wished her happiness and returned to the guests. And then Jake. Sarah nodded, taking notes. Mr. Sterling, how much time passed between your conversation and the discovery of the body? 15 minutes, no more. The ambulance arrived, but there was nothing the medics could do. The police and coroner arrived shortly after. Dr. James Wilson, the county's chief medical examiner, conducted a preliminary examination of the body. At first glance, it looks like a heart attack or stroke, he told Sarah, but we'll need a full autopsy to be sure. How long will that take? The results will be ready by Monday. Sarah looked around the scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries. Evelina was lying in a natural position, as if she had simply lost consciousness. But something didn't feel right. There were too many coincidences. The newspaper article on the eve of the wedding, Evelina's warning about a possible threat, the presence of her former lover. I want to interview everyone who saw Mrs. Connolly in the last half hour, she told her partner, Detective Tom Rodriguez. Do you think something's fishy? I don't know yet, but it's better to be safe than sorry. It took 2 hours to interview the witnesses. Most of the guests had last seen Evelina during the toast with Michael Sterling. Several people noticed them heading into the garden together. Eric was inconsolable. She was so young, so healthy. How could this happen? Jake was more reserved, but his eyes betrayed his suspicion. Detective, are you going to check out this Sterling? We'll check everyone who had contact with your sister, Sarah assured him. Michael maintained the dignity of a man experiencing a shared tragedy. He answered all the detective's questions, provided his contact information, and expressed his willingness to cooperate further with the investigation. This is a terrible loss for all of us, he said to Sarah. Evelyn was a wonderful woman. Would you mind if we checked your car? The detective asked unexpectedly. Michael tensed for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. Of course, I just don't understand why that's necessary. Standard procedure. Sarah searched his Mercedes but found nothing suspicious. The gun was in the glove compartment with the gun license, which was completely legal. By midnight, the scene was cleared. The body was taken to the morgue, the guests went home, and an eerie silence fell over the Doobie Country Club. Eric sat in the club's lobby, staring at one spot. Jake tried to comfort him, but words were useless. Michael was one of the last to leave the scene of the tragedy. As he approached his car, he felt Detective Mitchell's gaze on him. Their eyes met. Her gaze was suspicious, but so far it was only intuition. Goodbye, Mr. Sterling, she said. Goodbye, Detective. I hope you find out what caused this tragedy soon. Michael got into his car and drove home slowly. He felt strangely empty inside. He had expected relief, satisfaction, but all he felt was exhaustion. Evelina was dead. She would never be with him or anyone else again. Justice had prevailed. Monday began with cold Texas rain. At the county morgue, Dr. James Wilson was finishing the autopsy on Evelina Connolly, while Detective Sarah Mitchell waited impatiently for the results. Detective, I'm afraid I have bad news for you, Dr. Wilson said, removing his surgical gloves. The cause of death is asphyxiation, mechanical strangulation. Sarah straightened up. Murder? Definitely. There are clear finger marks on the neck. Death was quick, within 3 to 4 minutes. No other injuries or traces of poison in the blood. Time of death? Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, between 6:30 and 7 p.m. on Saturday. Sarah took out her notebook. Anything else? The doctor nodded. Skin cells and blood were found under the victim's fingernails. She tried to defend herself. Another interesting detail is that there are 2 wedding rings on her ring finger. 2? One is a wedding ring, which was worn by her husband. The second is older, with an engraving. Forever yours, M. Sarah felt all the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. M for Michael. Doctor, can you identify the DNA from the skin samples under the fingernails? Of course, the results will be ready tomorrow. Sarah immediately contacted her partner, Detective Tom Rodriguez. Tom, we need a search warrant for Michael Sterling's house, and bring him in for questioning, voluntarily, for now. What's the basis for that? Murder. Evelyn Connolly was strangled. An hour later, Michael was sitting in an interrogation room at the city police headquarters. He looked calm and controlled every word. Mr. Sterling, the autopsy results show that Mrs. Connolly was murdered, Sarah began. Michael feigned shock. Murdered? But how? Who could have done this? That's what we're trying to find out. You were one of the last people to see her alive. Detective, I understand that I'm under suspicion because of our past relationship, but I would never have hurt Evelyn. Sarah placed a photograph of the second ring on the table. Can you explain how your ring ended up on the victim's finger? Michael looked closely at the photo. It does look like the ring I bought for Evelyn 2 years ago, but I never gave it to her. Where was the ring last? In the safe at my house, but I haven't checked it in a long time. Mr. Sterling, could you show me your hands? Michael held out his hands. There were fresh scratches on the knuckles of his right hand. Where did you get these injuries? I was repairing the fence on my property yesterday. I got caught on some barbed wire. Sarah made a note. Do you have any witnesses? I was working alone, but I can show you the fence. It really did need repair. Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez was searching Sterling's house with a warrant. He didn't find the engraved wedding ring in the office safe, but he did find a folder with photos of Evelina taken with a hidden camera. A broken gelatin capsule and an empty potassium cyanide package dated last week were also found in the kitchen trash can. Mr. Sterling, Sarah continued, receiving a message from her partner. Can you explain why you needed cyanide? Michael didn't flinch. To control rodents on construction sites. We have a serious rat problem in the basement. And the photos of Mrs. Connolly in your safe? Memories of the past. Many people keep photos of former partners. Sarah knew that circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to make an arrest. She needed direct evidence. Mr. Sterling, tomorrow we'll get the results of the DNA analysis of the skin found under the victim's fingernails. Would you agree to provide a sample for comparison? Michael hesitated for a moment. Of course. I have nothing to hide. After taking Michael's DNA sample, he was released, but placed under surveillance. That evening, Sarah met with Jake Harrison at his auto repair shop. Jake, tell me about your last meeting with your sister before the wedding. What did you talk about? Jake put down his wrench and wiped his hands. Evelyn was scared. She said Sterling was watching her. Did she give any specific examples? Yes, my friend works as a valet in the city center, and he saw Sterling's car near her office several times over the last month. Sarah wrote down the valet's name. What else? A week before the wedding, Evelyn received a strange gift, a bouquet of black roses with no card. She was sure it was from Sterling. Where's the bouquet? Evelyn threw it away, but I took a picture with my phone. Jake showed the photo. Black roses with a note. Some decisions cannot be changed. Why didn't you go to the police sooner? Jake lowered his head. Evelyn asked us not to get involved. She said she could handle it herself. On Tuesday morning, the DNA test results came back. The skin cells under Evelyn's fingernails belonged to Michael Sterling with 99.7% certainty. Sarah got an arrest warrant. Michael was arrested at his office in front of his employees and clients. He didn't resist, but his face was grim. Michael Sterling, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Evelina Connolly, Sarah said as she handcuffed him. During a second interrogation, this time with his lawyer present, Michael continued to deny his guilt. My client does not admit guilt, said defense attorney Richard Blake. The DNA can be explained by physical contact between them during the conversation. What kind of contact? Asked Sarah. Michael was silent for a long time, then said, Evelyn started crying when she talked about the past. I hugged her to comfort her. She may have scratched my hands when she pulled away. Then explain the ring with your engraving on her finger. I don't know how it got there. Sarah placed the photos from his safe on the table. And these pictures? Were you following the victim? Michael glanced at his lawyer, who nodded discreetly. Yes, I sometimes watched Evelina, but that's not a crime. I loved her and couldn't forget her. Love doesn't give you the right to kill." "I didn't kill her." Michael's voice faltered for the first time, and it sounded genuinely pained. But the evidence spoke for itself. The motive, the opportunity, the physical evidence. Everything pointed to Michael Sterling. On the third day, the lawyer asked to meet with the prosecutor to discuss a possible plea bargain. "My client is prepared to plead guilty to manslaughter with mitigating circumstances," Blake said. Prosecutor David Harper shook his head. "The evidence points to first-degree murder. The ring on the victim's finger indicates premeditation." In his holding cell, Michael sat on a narrow cot and stared at the wall. For the first time in many years, he had lost control of the situation. His plan had seemed perfect, but he hadn't counted on one thing: Evelina would fight back. The scratches on his hands and the DNA under her fingernails had been his fatal mistake. On Thursday, the preliminary hearing took place. Judge Margaret Thompson heard the arguments of both sides and set the trial date for the following month. Michael was remanded in custody without bail as a particularly dangerous criminal. Eric Connolly was present at the hearing. Having lost his wife, he also lost interest in his business and life in Harrisville. He decided to sell the company and move to another state. "Justice will prevail," he told reporters after the hearing, "but that won't bring Evelina back." Jake Harrison was more emphatic. "I hope that monster rots in prison. My sister deserved a happy life." Detective Sarah Mitchell completed her investigation a week later. Her report stated, "The crime was motivated by jealousy and the defendant's inability to accept rejection. Michael Sterling stalked the victim for a long time, planned the murder, and carried it out in cold blood." A month later, the trial began. The evidence was so compelling that the jury reached a verdict after only 2 hours of deliberation: guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Thompson sentenced Michael Sterling to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "You took the life of a young woman on what should have been the happiest day of her life," the judge said during sentencing. "Your actions demonstrate a complete lack of humanity." Michael listened to the sentence without emotion. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned and looked at the crowded courtroom. In the front row sat Eric and Jake, the two men he had robbed of the most precious thing in their lives. In a Texas state prison, Michael was placed in solitary confinement. The guards considered him dangerous because of his wealth and connections. For the first few months, he wrote appeals, hired new lawyers, and tried to find procedural violations in the investigation. But all his attempts were unsuccessful. Gradually, Michael realized that his former life was over forever. Sterling Construction went bankrupt without its leader. The mansion was sold to pay off debts. Friends and business partners forgot about his existence. The only thing he had left in his cell was a photograph of Evelina that he had cut out of a newspaper. In the picture, she was smiling in her wedding dress, happy and beautiful. Sometimes at night, Michael talked to the photograph. "I'm sorry, Evelina. I wanted what was best. I just couldn't let you go." But the photograph remained silent, and outside the barred window of the cell, the Texas sun rose over a world in which Michael Sterling no longer existed. A year after the trial, Detective Sarah Mitchell received a thank you letter from Jake Harrison. He had moved to California, opened an auto repair shop, and married a local teacher. "Thank you for getting justice for my sister," he wrote. "Evelina would be proud of you." Sarah filed the letter away in her closed case folder. Justice had indeed prevailed, but the price was too high. A young woman died because of the sick obsession of a man who couldn't accept a simple truth. Love cannot be forced, and people cannot be treated like property. The Michael Sterling case served as a warning to Harrisville. Even in a small Texas town, monsters in expensive suits can lurk in the shadows.